Welcome to another edition of the Sim Racing Garage. I'm Barry Rowland, and in this episode, we're going to be reviewing the PlayStation-compatible Logitech G29 wheel set with pedals. So let's get to it. Now for a closer look at the Logitech G29 wheel system. First, we'll take a look at the wheel itself. When I first got the wheel in hand, obviously if you read the advertisement and marketing materials for this wheel, it is a leather-wrapped wheel, and it really is. The first one I got, I thought, well, maybe this is fake leather, but if you give it the quick sniff test, then yeah, it's real leather. So anyway, typical of this market segment, we've got a 280 millimeter wheel here, and we've got all the PlayStation buttons. Obviously this is the PlayStation version, being the G29, and it worked fine on my PlayStation 4. All the buttons were recognized, and it also works fine in the PC because obviously it just gets mapped to whatever buttons we press. And yeah, I had plenty of buttons here for being able to do pretty much everything I would want to do in the cockpit when I was in the car. So didn't have any problem with that. Not a bad looking wheel, actually. I like the blue accent up here. The case itself is the usual plastic affair that we see on these kind of wheels. And actually it does have some cool front end on it though. I'll do a close-up over here of it. You can see the front end. This reminds me, I don't know about you guys, but this reminds me of a Mustang, Ford Mustang grill for some reason. I don't know, maybe it doesn't look like that to you, but yeah, to me, the first thing I looked at, I said, wow, I hope they're paying Ford some money here because this really looks like a Ford Mustang grill, depending on the year you pick, obviously. All right, the usual affair here, we got some cooling slots. There is no fan in this, by the way, but we'll see that once we get to look inside. And obviously the silkscreen Logitech logo. We've got the clamps up here, and I always like these clamps. It's been one of my favorite clamping systems for wheels for over the years. When I had a G25 and G27, you can push these things down and give them a little twist to keep them out of the way. And they're very simple to use, and they grab your desk pretty well. I've never had a problem with these. I like this better than the Thrustmaster type clamp where it's just one screw and then the big yoke comes out. Yeah, this is a little bit more streamlined, I think. I've always kind of leaned toward this one as far as what I liked or not. Of course, everybody's different. Now, while we're on the bottom, it has some nice cable management slots here because we can put up to 4 peripherals, and actually just normally running without a shifter, we've got 3. It's got the power connector, we've got our pedal connector, and you can see all that's kind of put into the plastic so we can see where everything's supposed to go. Shifters over here, and obviously our USB is wrapped in there already. I like the USB cable length. It's very long, which makes it easy to get to my computer when I have it sitting in my P1. And in the past, I've had problems because my computer's kind of far away of getting the USB cable to it, but not so with this one. I really like that they put enough in here to reach, not have a problem. You can see the connections, the actual physical connections under there. We've got the pedal connection over here, power supply over here, which is the usual 3.5, 2.1 internal type of DC plug. Over here, obviously, we have the shifter, and both of these pins are the 9-pin DIN setup. Right, not much to see there. For mounting also, obviously we have the clamps, and we've also got 2 6mm threaded inserts in here that I'm going to use for when I mount this to the P1, and hopefully I'll be able to incorporate in tandem these guys here because it will definitely give you a more solid mount. And the case itself, you know, sometimes I'll grab a case and I'll kind of push on it and stuff just to see how strong it is out of the box, and this actually seems to be pretty stiff. So we'll just see how good it mounts to the P1 once we get to that point. Right, not much else to see on the bottom here. The shifters, well, you know, nothing special here. They get the job done, and that's really all they need to do. And there's just some stamped out metal here that's been, it looks like they've kind of cleaned up the edges, which is a good idea, since how people will be putting their fingers on them. And yeah, nothing special here for the shifters, and you can hear them clicking. They use a spring inside, or actually I'm not even sure if it's a spring. It might be just a piece of plastic that moves back and forth. And if that's the case, then that would be a wear item. So once you flex plastic a certain amount of times, it has a tendency to develop cracks. It might even break on you sometime, but we'll see that once we get into the look inside on the wheel. Right, not a whole lot to see here on the top. One more thing, we do have a PlayStation 3 or 4 selector, so depending on which one you're running. And on the back here, notice this, that they actually have put a screw in here, and that's to secure the leather up here, and of course they colored it blue so you have a center stripe on the wheel, or they might just be the accent itself and it has nothing to do with the leather. But no sense in taking that off. It's really not going to show us much. Right, so that's the wheel part. Now let's take a look at the pedal set that comes with this. And you over there. Now the pedals are, again, the standard fare from Logitech, and a lot of people out there are very familiar with these pedals. A lot of people have been using them for a long time, and I've been using the pedal sets that came with the G25 and the pedal set that came with the G27, and this pedal set is close to kind of like the same, to me anyway, but it's a little bit different design, obviously. We have the metal steel face plates. These are steel because they are magnetic. I tested them. And they've got this little plastic plate behind them. That's what these little spots are. And these spots are kind of, they're not grippy at all. They're very slick, so your foot's still going to slide across them. Actually, I ran this in socks, these pedals. And I actually like that because I forgot how great it was to be able to run in socks. It's very comfortable, actually. A lot of air gets around your feet. The only problem with socks is, obviously, with the higher end pedal sets, or the more pro versions, they're a little bit heavier duty, and it's a little bit harder on your feet. It's good to have some kind of a shoe for support on those. But here, yeah, no problem. Easy throttle. The clutch is a little bit more resistant than the throttle. And of course, the brake has its own characteristics because of what Logitech is doing with this brake. The housing itself, pretty strong. The usual, again, plastic that is used in this kind of stuff in the industry. We've got some ribbing and some little circles here to help reinforce it. You can still bend this. Obviously, it's just plastic, but it does help reinforce everything and make it lighter weight and less material used, so it saves money when manufacturing. We have anything else going on here in the back? Oh yeah, we got the carpet bar over here, and we'll go over here to the close-up camera to see how this works. And you can see the bar is actually kind of recessed now, so if I was on a hardwood floor or something, that's the way I would have it configured. And we have these little rubber pieces all around here. We got, looks like a total of 8 of them actually. Got them up here too. I don't know how well, I didn't run this on my concrete floor or a wood floor, so I just don't know how well that's going to stick. Probably still have to put something behind it for when you're forcefully manipulating rather your brake pedals. And yeah, for carpet though, this carpet bar actually works pretty good. I've actually used these before. And it's got the little button here, or switch or whatever. You pull that back and you can see it pops up. And now we have these sharp spikes over here that are going to grab into your carpet, so when you push, and you can see they have an angle on them, so that when you're pushing against the pedal faces and you're trying to push the pedals this way, it's going to grab your carpet. Right. But I won't be needing that, so we'll just put that back away like that. Right. Anything else we want to see here? Well, the pedals themselves, you can see in the back, it's the usual stamped metal affair that they're using for the pedal levers. And yeah, it's just a U-shaped, which is plenty for this kind of deal. Really, you know, you don't have to do anything much more than that, I'm sure, for the strength and for durability. And these plastic cylinders you see here are housing the springs or whatever, and whatever other parts they might have in here, like a bumper or something that captures the spring, keep it from moving around. And same thing over here in the clutch. Again, the face is up close. Not much to see here, very slick. I'd like to see maybe something a little bit grabbier for the brake, but you know, that's personal preference. And even when you're in socks, maybe that's not a good idea. Also, when you're using socks, I forgot how little fibers from your socks drop off as you're using your pedals. And I don't know about you guys, but you get these dust bunnies down here of fiber. Not only that, but it'll get down here in the grooves behind the pedals over here. And then you've got all this stuff down, and you take the cover off, you got all these fuzzies down there inside of the actual pedals. But that's not a big deal because these have housings around the springs. The Logitechs do not. The springs are exposed. So yeah, you can actually, I went into a set of Logitech pedals that somebody had been using for socks, with socks all the time, and boy, it was a mess in there with all these fibers over. I had to clean it all up. Just one of those things that I think about when I'm looking at pedals. Right. So we'll get into more detail on this once we have a look inside. One thing I did want to mention on this brake pedal, that Logitech has done something different on the G29 pedals, and probably the 920s also, because 920s should be the exact same thing as this, but for Xbox. And again, they're all resistors or potentiometers on here, and that's what we're using, distance for sending the signal instead of pressure. and they're trying to simulate, and this is what they say, they're trying to simulate a load cell here. And what that means is you can see that this pedal actually travels to a stop. And that's not really a stop, it's actually a bumper inside of here, piece of rubber. And then you can actually push it past that. So it's not a linear curve. They're trying to make this thing feel like you're pushing on a load cell and getting the same reaction you do, which I can tell you is completely not true, but they're trying to simulate it. And so once we get to a certain point in a load cell, we've compressed the bumpers or springs or whatever it is that we're pushing against, and then we've bottomed that out, and we're actually pushing more against the load cell itself at that time. Then it's all about pressure regulating how the brakes are gripping, and you can get a good feel for that, and that's what makes a load cell so much better than just having a potentiometer. Sure, potentiometer is fine, you can use it as a brake, it does fine. And I found this to be grippy, or not grippy, grabby, that's the right word, grabby. And what I mean by that is, when I came from a load cell brake and went to this brake, if I pushed down on it and I was trying to use it like a load cell, just increasing the pressure, it would just kind of grab where I didn't expect it to. Apparently, and I did some research on this, and from what I understand, there is a curve on this in the firmware on the pedals, or actually over here in the wheelbase. And once this potentiometer reaches a certain position, then as you push it further, it multiplies the distance. So it's got this curve that increases the pressure on the brake that you're in the car you're running. And that tended to be grabby for me. Now I was able to adjust with that after a little while, and just like everybody else, you know, we're human beings, we can adjust to these things. But when I first got on it, it's kind of grabby because they're increasing the force so rapidly at this last little bit of travel you get that it just grabs the car. So again, you can adjust to that, but yeah, load cells don't do that. It's very linear on a load cell. As you keep pressing down, you just get more grab, and then of course you'll lock the wheels up there too, but it's not that instant grab. You can feel it as a progressive grab. So this, simulating a load cell, not so much. But I am going to get a load cell kit for this pedal set and put it in here so it'll have a real load cell. But then again, there might be some complications from that because of the firmware curve that this has on it towards the end. Now I might be able to dial some of that out on the PC, but in the PlayStation, well, I'm sure that there's really nothing we can do about that if you have the load cell in. But still, regardless of that, a load cell's got to be better than just a rubber bumper and a potentiometer as far as your overall braking consistency, even with that curve at the end. But like I said, once we get one of those in and we modify it, then we'll test that out and see if it actually is true or not. Right. Anything else we want to look at? Let's see. Oh, you do get the power supply, your standard power supply, AC DC adapter, if you will. And this one is, get a closer look over here. I don't know if you guys will be able to see this. It was really hard to see. It's very fine lettering up here. This is, again, the typical 120 up to 220, so it's adaptable to European or North American electrical standards. And this is actually a 24. Again, I don't think you guys will be able to see that, but it's a real small print right up in here. The rest of it's like kanji, Chinese or whatever, kanji stuff that I can't read anyway, but it does have the numbers 24 volt DC and 1.75 amps. So that is 24 volts that is available to our wheel, which is a good thing. The same thing with the Thrustmaster T300. It was also a 24 volt power supply, and I expect to have some pretty decent force feedback from this wheel because of that power rating, and being able to supply almost 2 full amps of draw leads me to believe there's going to be some decent power in the force feedback for this wheel, but we'll find that out once we get to it. Right. Anything else? I think that's it. Again, I did mention the long cables, and it gives you a nice long cable for your power supply. We also have a very nice long cable on the pedals, so even though the pedals are usually pretty close to the wheel. But if you wanted to do some cable management and route it all around and hide it, and you've got plenty of room to do that. So that's nice too. I'm glad they thought of that. So yeah, I guess that's it for a closer look. And what we'll do next is the usual. We'll start taking things apart and just see how all this stuff works. So now we can go ahead and take the pedals apart, and we're going to do that by first removing these pedal faces, and they have a 2.5 millimeter hex countersunk screw or flathead screw in here on these countersinks. So let's go ahead and pull the pedal faces off. Actually got one out over here already, so let's go ahead and pull that one. You see these are pretty long screws here. The pedal face comes off, and it's actually 2 pieces, but we'll look at that in a second. Let's get the rest of these off first. And the throttle pedal actually has a shorter one, as you can see here. So there's a big size difference between the throttle and the rest of them. See how long that is. Huh. Not sure why, but let's see if we can figure that out. All right, so we got that one out. All the pedal faces are off. Yeah, I can see why now. You can see that how big these blocks are. And we can actually pull those off too, but there's really no need to. But you can see how much thicker these blocks are on the brake and the clutch than they are on the actual throttle. So that's why it's longer. All right. Now each one of these pedal faces, let's get this out of the way, is actually a 2-piece part. You can actually pull this apart, and it's got this plastic backer that has the little tabs in it or knobs on it. And obviously this is just a piece of metal. And this is actually metal, it's not aluminum, so it's steel. I'm not sure why they went with steel instead of aluminum, but whatever. Right, so easy enough to see how that goes together. And we'll just keep these off to the side somewhere so we don't lose the pieces. And obviously our screws are secured in our magnetic dish. Now all we got to do is turn this puppy over. Now, there's a few screws in here. There's actually 2 up here. And I don't know if you can see this, but under this carpet bar, there's actually a couple more screws in there. I don't know if you can, it's right up here on the top part. So I don't know if you'll be able to see them or not, but they're close to proximity of where those top ones are. They're easier to see. So we've got 4 in here. Then we went down here, we've got another 4 across here and another 4 down here. And you'll also see we have some other screws in there, but we are not going to take these screws out, okay? They're actually holding the pedals in, so we're going to leave those there so when we take it off, the pedals will stay with the bottom, and it'll be more organized. Things won't be flopping all around if we do that. So we'll go ahead and pull all these little screws out, and we'll change our bit for that. And we'll go ahead and speed this up just so you guys don't have to suffer through a long period. All right, so as you saw when I took this last screw out, it wants to fall apart now. So I'm just going to take this on, put it on its side and kind of let it come out so that both pieces are supported on the table as I'm pulling this stuff out. And we know we've got a wire in here, so we have to be careful with that. And as I pull the top off, first off, when we pull the top off, you'll notice down in here what they've done. If you see right down in here, there's a little piece in there. It's keeping the USB that's connected to all these pedals on there. So what I'm going to do is kind of lay this down and take my driver and undo those. I have to do it one-handed because I don't want these pedals to slide anywhere on me. There we go. So now we're free. The USB cable is, so it's free to go with the rest of the pedal section, which is this section here, obviously. And we'll go ahead and take this and put it aside. And there we have the finished unveiling of the pedals. Now that we have revealed the pedals, now we can take a closer look at how all this is working. And again, be mindful as I'm turning this around. This is very fragile looking wires here. If you look at how they've done this, you can see that they're just kind of combining all the wires together and then bring it out to this one big wire. So you want to be careful of these little teeny wires here that you don't mess anything up. Of course, you can see in here that it's all potentiometer driven. So each one of the pedals has a potentiometer, obviously. And what I want to do is, let's go ahead and take these things. I want to see what they've got inside of here as far as springs and bumpers and things like that. First off, we're going to have to take these 2.5 millimeter screws off both sides of these pedals. There's a support in here in between there that's actually going in between that part of the housing right in there. So we'll go ahead and do that. This should be pretty quick, so I'll just do normal speed on this. All right, just another flathead screw going into a countersunk hole. Little teeny guy there. And we'll get the other side. And this is a little tricky getting in between these, so you definitely need a ball head type of Allen wrench or Allen driver. So you got a little ball on this thing, so I can get a lot of different angles. I can actually get it that much of an angle on that screw and still unscrew it. So yeah, very helpful to have that. Right. And you may have seen this actually move up a little bit when I took that last screw out because it's under spring pressure. So all we're going to do is pull back on this and release it from the back. So we just pull them and we'll actually pull the lever too. There we go. And it just pops out that easy. Not a whole lot to do here. You can see actually that the metal support in the top is already coming out. Let's see what that is. Let's go ahead and pull this off. We see we have a spring down in there. Oop. So yeah, this is actually a heavy duty piece here. This is actually a brass threaded insert that they're using in the top of this. So that gives it good strength. I like actually seeing that instead of just a piece of aluminum or another piece of plastic or something. So yeah, that's good. So we'll set this aside over here. Make sure we keep all our parts where they need to be. And then we'll take the spring out of this one. Now, this actually is just a spring. That's all there is to it. And of course, this is the clutch pedal. So this is the spring that's inside. And there's nothing else in here. Just a piece of plastic. Get you a closer look at that. Now, they do make performance improvement kits for these pedals. And I know one of them is a heavier spring, and then they have this little insert that goes down in here to support the spring, or make it, actually some of them are just little inserts that go down there and just make the spring sit up higher, so when you compress the spring, you actually have more pre-tension on it, so it makes it harder to push. So it's a pretty simple thing. It's a little 3D printed insert that goes in there. And some of them have these inserts that actually screw inside the spring, like my finger would be, like that, and then create a dampening or a bushing effect, if you will, when you're pushing the pedal, basically making it harder to push. But we still have this potentiometer doing everything. So we're only as accurate as the potentiometer that they're using here. So I'll turn that around. There you go. And if you look on the side here, it's got these big prongs coming off the side. You've got 3 of them, and each one of them has a wire. And it looks like these are little blade things, so we could just pull these off at will to replace the potentiometer. The only tricky part about fixing one of these and replacing the potentiometer, from what I can see, is this is probably all set up in the firmware, so we know exactly where that potentiometer is. So you guys see that. As I'm moving that, you can see these gears in here. You got a gear on the potentiometer, and you got a gear on the pedal lever that's turning the potentiometer, obviously, as we're manipulating the pedal. So the firmware knows what resistance value means, what position, how it relates to this. So if you have to replace this, you have to make sure that, I don't know if there's a recalibration process or if it's even doable. You could do it from trial and error, I guess, from just putting the teeth together against the counter teeth on the gear on the lever, and then calculate it, or just keep trying and move it around a little bit from one tooth to the next until you get a suitable reaction from the pedal if you did have to replace that potentiometer on there. Right, so pretty simple really. So really it's just going to be a matter of what do we have in these bodies here as far as working the pedals. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this one back together real quick because we don't need it apart anymore. I'm just not gonna screw it in. I'm just gonna kind of put it out of the way here so everything's kind of where it needs to be. Then we'll go ahead and take the screws out of this one. And again, a little bit of a weird angle here to work with, but doable. We'll go over here and get this one. And I'll keep pressure on it this time so it doesn't pop up as the screw disengages, because this will be a little bit more on this one, I believe, because it's the brake. Right, so again, we're just going to pull down on this brake pedal, and then pull forward with the lever as we're kind of separating everything. Here's a snug fit in there, which is a good thing. You see it just popped up. Again, get this bushing out so it doesn't fly off somewhere. And pull this off. All right. And on the brake, it actually has a little piece on the top there that captures the spring. Actually, the clutch does too, and so does the accelerator. So not a whole lot different going on there. Right? Okay, looks like we got a thicker spring. Obviously, this is a brake, so it is a thicker spring. Put that aside. And here's our our rubber bumper. And this is actually simulating, well, that's what they say, the marketing says. They're trying to simulate a load cell by having this, and I discussed it before when we were taking a closer look, that as we press down on this, obviously it doesn't travel as far as when we're just pressing down on the spring. So less travel is happening in our gears down here on the brake as we're using it. So we get to a certain point, and then we hit this rubber bumper, and then we're just moving a little bit further. So that's where they've got a firmware curve in the software that compensates for that less movement, but still it adds force to the brake pedal for that little bit of movement that we're doing that normally wouldn't be there if it was a linear curve. So it was just, as it moved, and that's how much went in. So again, they're trying to make this act like or mimic a load cell, but it just doesn't quite do it for me anyway. It just doesn't make it, a lot of people just take this thing and pull it out and then go right back to the spring. But they don't realize that there's a curve in here for the firmware, so even though it probably feels better, and maybe it feels better to them, and they can tell better on what position it is without having to push through that. So that probably would make a difference. But really, they don't have different profiles, unfortunately, to pick for the pedal, which would be nice if they did, but they don't, because I've already looked at the software. So there it is. That's our load cell simulator. Right, so let's go ahead and just pull the last one open. Let's leave the brake out for now. And again, get our screws out. Tricky angle screw here. I'll pull it down on this, even though this is probably going to be, because it's the throttle and it's the easiest one, it's going to be the one with the least amount of spring pressure on it. We'll push this down as we pull it out. There we go. And actually, this has a little bit of a different looking spring retainer assembly in there, if you look at that. Again, we have our brass. And on the bottom, it's the same thing as the clutch. So basically nothing. It's just empty, except for this retaining piece in there that keeps the spring from going around. So we've got the throttle spring, and obviously the clutch, we've got that one in there that was obviously thicker than this. This throttle's pretty weak, actually. Pretty easy to do. Of course, there's personal preference whether you want to increase that. They actually make, again, the kits that will fit in all three of these springs that make things a little bit harder to push. But yeah, because this brake has that curve in the firmware, I'm just not sure how effective all that stuff is on the new G29 and 920 pedal sets. I'm assuming the 920 has the same kind of curve in the firmware. Right, well, pretty simple stuff here. Doesn't get much easier than this, right? Again, there's lots of mods for these things available. You can try a bunch of them if you want. And as I said before, when I was doing a closer look, I'm actually going to put a load cell mod on this. And I'm going to do a video on that and just see how different it is, because as I mentioned before, the brakes tend to be a little grabby. There's some grease on these, by the way, and that's to make it easier from the slide back and forth as we're using them. So if you disassemble them and you happen to wipe some of the grease off, you want to put some of that back on. Just a little side note there that I was thinking about while I was thinking and talking at the same time. How about that? Right, so we're going to put everything back together, and then what we'll do is get the wheel and everything mounted and take these puppies for a run and see how they do. All right, so now we're ready to disassemble the wheel so we can get to the insides and see what's going on there. Now this is a little bit more complex wheel than, say, a Thrustmaster, where you can just pull the wheel off and be done with that part. We actually have to disassemble the wheel too. And there's a couple, actually this is a certain sequence you've got to do this in. And if you look in the back here, there's some places where you can see where the screw holes are, right? So we got 6 of these bigger screws or bigger holes, but not only that, we've got these little teeny guys here, which are our our little switches here. And they got some little teeny screws in those. So these two have to come out also. So we've got a total of 8 screws to get to here. Typically what I'll do is just kind of turn it upside down so I can turn the housing. It allows me to get to the screws better than if you just try to, get to it without doing that, because this makes it a lot easier. So what we're going to do is go ahead and speed this up as I take them out. I got 6 main screws, and again, got a little screw over here in this buttons I got to take out. So we'll just go ahead and speed it up as I do that. Alright, so now we've got all the back screws loose. Now what I've got to do is pull this front plate off, and these are 5mm hex cap screws, and I can speed that one up actually because I've got this. So we'll just go ahead and pull these off real quick. Alright, so that was fast. Now all we have to do is pull this cap off. It comes right off. Now we're going to pull the wheel off, and the reason we had to take these buttons off here is because, as you can see, they kind of sit here like this and have their lip up against that steering plate here of the steering wheel, the front face. So yeah, you can't get them past these, so you have to take them off. Alright, so there should be a cable, and we're going to take this off very carefully. Let's see if you guys can see that. There we go. Bring it off. See a Molex connector there on the wheel board over here. So all we're going to do is reach in there and grab that, gently take it out of the plug. Don't want to break anything. There we go. Nice and free. And we'll take a look at the wheel. Alright, so of course we have a circuit board in here. We would expect this from a major player like Logitech and Thrustmaster. All those guys have the same thing, Fanatic. Nice little ribbon cable here for a little daughter board that is the PlayStation share option and PlayStation button. Right, and we've got our shifters here. And these are actually, doesn't really say what it is, but obviously we've got 2 of them for our paddle shifters. Right, not a whole lot to see here, so we'll just go ahead and set this aside. Now, we got to pull the hub off now. Fortunately, there's only 3 screws to do that, and we can do that pretty quickly too by using the driver. It's easy to get to these, so it's no worry of stripping it out or anything. So we'll go ahead and get those out now. So now that we have those screws out, all we have to do is carefully pull our hub off. And there's actually a hole down there, obviously, for this wire to come through. This Molex plug is a little bit bigger than that hole as far as if you try to pull it through squarely like that. We're going to have to kind of twist it around and get it to go out sideways. So you have to be careful when you're taking that off and you're doing that. So this kind of you kind of wiggle it, it'll come off. There we go. So as it goes down, I'm going to keep an eye on what's going on down here and kind of see if I can get my 2 fingers. You probably won't see me doing this because you got to get your finger down in the way of the camera to get this done right. Kind of twist it sideways. I'm twisting it sideways on the bottom here. There it goes. Now it came out. Alright, no stress on the wires, so our plug should be good to go. Right. Now, obviously the shifters are on here too, by the way, but yeah, I'm not going to pull those off. Really don't need to, but it's just 4 more screws and they come right off. Easy enough. Right, so now we've got to take all the screws off the bottom of this. And we've got 4 across the top, we've got 2 on each side, so it's a total of 8 screws. Now you really can't use a power driver on these because I don't know if you can see in there, but boy, those are little teeny heads in there, and it's probably very easy to strip them out if I'm using that power driver over there. So that means we've got to do it the old-fashioned way. So I'll go ahead and speed this up, but I got 8 of these I'm going to have to take out, so it's going to take a minute or so to get this done. Now that we have the screws loose, the top is loose, but we still have to loosen up our clamps. And you'll see the back come up as I do this, because there's some circular tabs on here that actually lower and extend these things. We'll see the mechanism once we get in here, but you want to be gentle with this, and we're just going to kind of tilt it up and bring it forward. All the time being mindful we don't want to catch this Molex plug on this cover here and rip any wires out. So it's pretty easy. You just got to kind of be gentle with it. Kind of wiggle it around a little. There it goes. And again, watch out for that plug. And there we have it. All right. Now let's take a look what's going on in here. Let me go ahead and tighten these down. I don't want them flopping around. And there's that little round tab that I was telling you about that I was actually lifting the top up. Right. Okay, so it looks like we have our main board here. And obviously it's controlling the motors and also the USB position sensor, all that good stuff. So we'll just kind of start over here and go around. You can see it has an encoder on the back of this motor. Hey, that even rhymed, I think. And over here we don't have one. So this is kind of like the slave motor to this motor. And so this board is picking up all the signaling off this position sensor right here. And the encoder, you can see the plastic housing there. So it's sending, obviously it's sending the signals over to the board, and the board is actually controlling these motors by using this current connections here, these electrical connections. So we have one going over here to this motor, we have this one that goes over to this motor. So it's telling the motors what to do when we're actually using the force feedback. And you can see this is a motor controller circuit built in here, because you can see the size of these resistors, diode, and a capacitor. That's pretty large. For usually when you open up something and see a circuit board, you don't see anything that large. So that's the motor controller built into the board. So that's how we're doing it. We're controlling it with the current. Very simple, really. And a lot of setups are like this. I like the fact that we're seeing all these ferrite cores on all of the data wires coming in. We've got the, I think this is the, yeah, this is the pedals over here. And over here it looks like we're coming over from the, where are we coming over from? USB. Okay, so that's, or maybe that's not the USB. But anyway, you can see that it's a very neat looking board. The position sensors wired up here. We've got the data coming from the USB, actually from looping under here. That's where the USB is, all these wires here. And I believe this is the shifter controller. Wires coming, looping around from over here back over to there. Right. So what I'm going to do here is, because there's some mechanisms behind this board showing how this works, and it just shows how it works better than me trying to let you take a look down inside of there and see how everything's doing. I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and pull the plugs off this board, pull the board off. There's a metal plate here that comes off completely with 4 screws. We'll just take that plate off and take a look at how all this is working as far as the motors, the bearings holding the motor and all that. And we'll just do that, and when we come back we'll have the board off and take a look at that. There, that's better. Now we can actually see what's going on here. And of course the board just came off as one piece. Easy enough. And we just had to pull this bracket off so we could actually see what's going on in here. Now, first off, let's look at the front here. And you can see that this shaft is actually riding in a very large sealed or shielded bearing. And there's a number on it here. I believe it's 6910. I don't know if you guys will be able to see that. There it is. Very large bearing, actually. And there's another bearing on the back here, if you look at there, that's actually a little smaller, that's got the other side of the shaft. So very stable piece right here. And you can see what's going on here. There's a pinion gear on the back of here, and it's moving that bar back and forth. Now, I'm thinking that this bar is more like a stabilizing effect on the motors and the shaft itself. So when it's turning fast and we're doing the force feedbacks hitting hard, that this keeps everything stabilized, whereas just being in the bearings and just having the shaft floating wouldn't do the same thing. So I'm sure that's pretty much what it is. Could be some kind of a synchronizer also, but I'm just thinking it's more of a stabilizer. And it's all greased up down there, you can see. And if you look down the side here, it's actually in a groove. Get it come out here. It's riding in a groove in the plastic casing on the bottom. Right, and it feels pretty substantial, but that's probably because I'm turning against these motors here. And speaking of the motors, obviously we have two of them, and each one has a pinion gear on the top of it. Now, it's way too much just to pull this whole thing apart and take that cover off, but we can get the idea of what's going on here. You can see these indentations in the plastic here. There's a pinion in that space on the top of this motor shaft. Same thing going on over here, obviously. So as the motors are turning, they're turning against a big gear here, and really it's not going to be easy to see that, but I might be able to, you guys might be able to see the teeth there on top of that gear. And it looks like just a plastic gear. I wouldn't say it's a metal one, but you can see it moving, obviously, when we're turning the motors, or turning the shaft, which is turning the motors. So that's how it's all working. Of course, it's a hollow shaft so that our cable up here can pass through it. That goes to our steering wheel. So yeah, and you can see the motors in there. They got these big cooling slots in them. So get you a look at there. You can see the encoder on this one, on the back here. You see the slot on this one. So yeah, no fans here either. I noticed that when I first took it off. I said, well, I guess these motors, because of the slots in here and the action of them moving back and forth, keeps it cool enough apparently, or we'd see a fan in here or something, right? Yeah, so I kind of like what I'm seeing here. It's very stable. And when you're turning this wheel, and if you have a G29 or probably the G920, I'm assuming they're probably exactly the same, just one's for Xbox. But yeah, it feels pretty good. I can't feel any gear lash at all. Well, obviously there's some in there, it wouldn't be turning, but yeah, there's no like real looseness feeling to this. And I like the use of these big bearings, these heavy duty bearings in here on this, even though the metal here is only about probably a 1/16 inch, a little over, as far as the support of all of the motors and the bearings there. But yes, it feels very substantial. So I like what I'm feeling here. This is really well built from what I can tell so far. Yeah, right. So I guess we've torn it down as far as we can go and seen what's going on inside. So yeah, I guess we'll just go ahead and end the look inside segment on that. So now we've got the wheelbase mounted over here to our SimLabs wheel deck, and we're using the two 6mm screw holes on the bottom here that we saw in the previous part of this video. And I was actually able to use, and I don't know if SimLabs designed this wheelbase this way, but I was actually able to use the clamps, the table clamps also with this. And the result is pretty amazing. It's solid as a rock. I mean, I'm pulling on it and it's not moving. And I'm totally shocked that this wheelbase has the structural integrity when mounted this way, that yeah, you would think there'd still be some kind of flex somewhere in this, but there's not, which is a great thing, because now the motor in here is going to be able to transmit more tactile feedback and force feedback over to our wheel. Now, of course, we're going to lose some in the wheel, because we always do, and it doesn't matter which rim you're running. The rims will flex a little bit. And of course, this will be a little bit more flexy than, let's say, one of the higher end wheel sets. But down here where the joint is, mounting it to the actual motor shaft, it really is pretty tight. I'm pretty amazed at just how tight this is. I was not expecting this. So we should be able to get some pretty good force feedback. At least we'll get all the force feedback that this motor can put out directly to our wheel. There won't be any loss in the way if we just had this mounted to a desk and clamped down, it would still be kind of wobbly, so we would lose a little bit of that fidelity of our force feedback, but not with this situation. So yeah, really liking this. What we'll do next is take a look at how we mount the pedals and how that looks. So now we've got the pedals mounted securely to our P1 pedal tray, and you can see I've actually tilted this up. I could actually tilt it up a little more by mounting another corner bracket on the top of this 40 series, but this is good enough. I just wanted to get rid of these are pretty laid back pedals. The rake on them is really laid back, but then again, they're made primarily to be stuck under a desk or something like that. So when you're sitting like that, then it's a good angle. But when you're sitting in a cockpit like this, you really need to get them cut back so they're more of a straight up and down. And fortunately, we were able to do that with this pedal tray. Very cool. Now, the pedals, actually, we're just using 2 of the 6mm screws on the base here to use it. And there is a little up and down movement, but that's because it's such a long piece hanging off here. And anyway, it really doesn't matter because we're going to have our feet on top of this. As long as we're not shaking that way, we're okay. So I think this is going to be just fine. And yeah, so now we've got the pedals mounted. We can go to the next segment. All right, so here we are in iRacing in the IndyCar 2018 version. And we're at Laguna Seca because that's where they are this week in the series. I'm going to throw up my settings here. And of course, this is totally subjective, but it's just what I ended up with. Obviously, I don't have linear on because this is not a direct drive wheel. And I would actually change this from track to track and also from car to car, but for this car, that's where I ended up with. Now, first off, the force feedback that I noticed was actually pretty good. I didn't have a problem with it right off the bat. And I remember that my G25 and G27s that I owned previously had, it seemed like more pronounced cogging. Now, this is obviously a gear-to-gear drive wheel, and if you saw my look inside, you'll know that. And you're always going to get some kind of cogging because there has to be some kind of lash or looseness between the gears for them to, well, to be able to turn. But yeah, the cogging seems to be a lot less pronounced than I remembered it was, and it's very minimal actually. And the advantage of gear to gear, of course, it gives it, versus say a belt like a Thrustmaster, is that it gives you a more direct or pronounced feel of the force feedback forces, what I'm trying to say. And it's because it's just an instant thing when it goes from gear to gear, except for that little bit of gear lash rather. And yeah, I really like this wheel. It gives you, and you can see the effects I'm getting in the wheel when I'm going in the curbing and the bumps and things, and I was able to catch slides, and you know, that's what these wheels are supposed to be doing. And for the intended market segment, I think it does a pretty good job. I'm surprised that, well, not completely surprised, but I'm just a little more surprised than I thought I would be on how well that I was able to control the car using this wheel because of the force feedback. Now, the pedal set that comes with this, and I'll superimpose them down there, also did a good job. At first, the brake, however, because they got this, you know, this marketing thing where they're simulating a load cell, which, you know, let me tell you, they're not simulating a load cell here by putting this block of rubber in there, and then they changed the firmware to have an aggressive curve at the very end of the pedal travel from the potentiometer's position. Yeah, it was grabby because I was coming from a load cell and also a pressure type of hydraulic brake. So anytime you have anything that's related to pressure giving you the amount of brake you're doing, and then you come to the potentiometers, then yeah, there's an adjustment period. Let me put it that way. And it really was adjustment because of the way the pressure at the very end started getting grabby. But I adapted to it and had no problem. Had a lot of fun driving in socks again, by the way. I hadn't done that in a while, and I forgot just how comfortable it is and why we see so many people driving in their socks. So that was fun. It kept my feet cooler too. And other than the brake, in adapting to the brake, the pedals, as far as the throttle and clutch, did a fine job. So no problem really with the pedals. And we'll go ahead and move on to Assetto Corsa, and I'll throw up my settings for that here. Again, with the disclaimer that all this is very subjective and your mileage may vary. Now, if we look over here at the clutch settings or the pedal settings, you'll see that I actually have my slider from 0% all the way over to the right, about midway there. And the reason was, out of the box, for some reason, Assetto Corsa sees the clutch half engaged. And obviously you can't drive like that because every time you step on the gas hard, then it just slips, the clutch slips, because it's just like if you had the clutch pedal pushed in a little bit when you hit the gas. It just starts slipping, it hits the rev limiter, and you can't go very fast. And as soon as I got in the Assetto Corsa, I was going, oh, what is going on here? But I ended up figuring out that, yeah, it was the clutch is slipping, and went ahead and put that back to where it needed to be. Right, back to the wheel. So you can see, if you just saw that section there, I'm actually able to catch slides really well here in Assetto Corsa. I do like Assetto Corsa's feedback a little bit better, I think, than the iRacing, which I think is second. And it really depends on tracks and cars. Sometimes it can go the other way. But I'm in the Corvette C6R here, and it's doing a very good job, the wheel is, as far as giving me the feedback I need to catch those little slides, because this Corvette is kind of slippery out here on Assetto Corsa. I think it's the tire model's a little bit too slick, to be quite honest, but that's a different subject entirely. But yeah, the wheel And the pedals here worked fine once I got that clutch sorted. And yeah, I had a good time using it here. And the force feedback is ample. Again, just like it was in iRacing, you got plenty of power to let you know when the rear end's coming around rather. And yeah, the front end gets loose on you, and you can feel that in the wheel. As you can see when I was catching those slides previously, it allows you to do that. And that's really what this force feedback is all about. You can catch this and feel the bumps and feel the curbing and feel the rumble strips and such. Now, when we went over to the PlayStation 4, I was in the Ferrari here, I believe. Yes, this is the Ferraris. And throw my settings up here. And again, my usual disclaimer, you know, your mileage may vary here with these settings, but this is what I came up with that made it feel pretty good. It actually felt a little bit better to me than the T300 RS from Thrustmaster when I was running the same game, same cars. And I was a little surprised at that, but not completely, because we are dealing with two different types of drive systems here, belt versus gear. Now, you don't get the cogging with the belt, obviously. You get a much smoother, not much, but you do get a smoother application of force feedback. But I think it's at the cost of some of the more pronounced immediate feedback you can get from the gear-driven wheels. But then again, that's all subjective too, as far as what you prefer for yourself. But the main thing is, this allowed me to catch slides. It allowed me to feel the rumble strips that I just went over there, and it allowed me to keep control of the car because of the force feedback cues that I was getting, and that's the most important thing, as I said before. If you have a wheel that's too vague, or the settings are too vague and you can't control the car, it's not going to do you much good to use that wheel or those settings, of course. Now, of course, I'm driving against the not so great artificial intelligence, or AI, of PlayStation 4 in the Project Cars 2, and that's what this game is, if you guys didn't notice that yet. And yeah, it's still fun to drive against them, and this wheel makes it fun. I had more fun with this wheel than I did with the Thrustmaster, and again, you know, other people might think the other way, but that's all subjective. It really doesn't matter what you think, as long as you're having a good time with it. And allow me to get my braking right. The pedals did a good job here, and where I could actually outbrake that guy there, get him on the inside, not really have to dive bomb him and hit him. So that was a good pass there, in other words. But yeah, I had some fun with the Project Cars 2, and I usually don't have a lot of fun with Project Cars 2 on the PlayStation. I think the PC version's a little bit better, but you know, Project Cars is Project Cars, and it's not like driving an iRacing or even a Assetto Corsa. It's more of a game type thing going on. Nothing wrong with that. I still had a great time with it. So yeah, the wheel did good here, and overall, I think this wheel is, yeah, for the market segment, they've got it pretty right here, except for I'm not crazy about this so-called load cell simulation in the brake. I wish they would have left it the way it was. I know a lot of guys take that rubber out anyway and throw it in the garbage, but the problem is we still have this firmware curve that Logitech has put into to their software, and I wish that they had an option to download a firmware that didn't have that, so we could get back to a pure linear type curve on the brake pedal. But yeah, that's, you know, I sent them an email, but I haven't heard back, and I really don't expect to. So yeah, that's about it as far as the driving impressions, and yeah, I guess it's we'll get on to the final thoughts. Final thoughts on the Logitech G29 wheel set. I think Logitech has done a decent job on making this wheel and pedal set. At around $270, it's relatively affordable and places well with other force feedback wheel sets that are available in this market segment. It provides force feedback that is good enough to let the driver know what the car is doing. You can tell when you're at the limits of your grip and what you need to do to correct slides and brake lockup. Now, it also provides good force feedback cues when rolling over bumps and curbs and rumble strips and things like that. And I think it comes in a rather clean and attractive package. And this wheel has plenty of buttons for the most common tasks that a driver will need to perform. And I like that Logitech has chosen to use real leather instead of other materials that mimic leather on the rim here. It feels a lot better than, say, a pleather wheel would. Now, when you look inside the wheelbase, I think they've done a proper job on the materials and parts used in the G29's construction. And I think it's on par with other offerings at this price point. Now, using a gear-driven shaft instead of a belt-driven one does produce some cogging, but it's not that bad. It's kind of minor. And that's when I'm comparing it to like my G25 or my G27 that I used to have. But on the plus side, direct gear drive does seem to provide just a bit more force feedback detail than, say, the belt-driven wheel. But this is at the expense of a belt-driven wheel's smoothness. Now, the pedal set that comes with the G29 is a competent set that provides a comfortable driving experience. I haven't been able to drive around in socks for quite some time and forgotten how good it felt and how comfortable it was. The brake pedal feel. Well, it was a bit tricky for me at first, and I'm sure this is because I was coming from a proper pressure-sensitive brake pedal system like my HPPs and some HEs that I had. It wanted to, seemed to me anyway, it wanted to grab at the end of the brake's pedal travel. And I think this is because of Logitech's decision to try and mimic the feel of a load cell brake pedal. Now, I haven't mapped it out yet, but I'm pretty sure there's a very aggressive curve at the end of the brake pedal's travel. Combined with that rubber cube that sits inside the brake spring, it is supposed to feel like you are using a real brake pedal or a brake pedal that's equipped with a load cell. Well, I can tell you from my experience that it doesn't. It didn't feel like a load cell to me. Now, I know some users have pulled out the rubber cube to try and improve the feel, but even if you do that, you still have the nonlinear curve in the firmware to deal with. Now, I wish Logitech would, give users a choice of whether or not they want to use the rubber cube. And if you do take it out, then provide us with a firmware with a more linear curve for the brake pedal. And I think that would make things a lot better for everybody. And then when you put an aftermarket load cell in it, you'd have a linear curve to deal with that also. Overall, this wheel set will give you a mostly good experience when driving the sim or game of your choice. I'm Barry Rowland, and thanks again for watching the Sim Racing Garage channel.